Welcome to Community Forum. My name is John. Excuse me. My name is John Gogliettino, and I'm your host. This evening, we're going to be talking to an old friend of the show, Judge Dianne Yamin is with us, and we're going to be talking about what's new, what's come up in the legislative process that makes her job new as a probate judge, and she has to do her homework when these things happen. So we're going to be reviewing that once again. And for some of you who've never had the stuff of what a probate judge does, so we're going to go over that also. So welcome once again to the show.
Always a pleasure.
Okay, and it's been a few times you've been on here. We were just talking about that. First of all, let's get into a little bit of background about yourself for people who may have just moved into the area and don't know you. Before you were a probate judge, you want to talk about your educational background, a little bit about your family, and then.
Okay, sure.
You know.
I'm a third generation Danburyan and attended Danbury High School, went on to Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Wanted to be a lawyer since 10th grade, so I went on to law school in Georgia, but I came back to Danbury, my hometown, to practice. And I
good for you.
I love Danbury. I practiced with the small firm Gerald Hecht and Associates for a couple years, where I did general practice. And then in 1990, I ran for probate judge. And I had only been an attorney for 4 years, but I knocked on every door and lost 20 pounds. And I really enjoyed campaigning and meeting everyone. And so I won that position. I was the youngest judge in Connecticut at the time.
And you're still running because you never gained that 20 pounds back.
Oh, thank you, thank you. But in any event, so I've been probate judge since 1990, so I'm in my 23rd year. And I also practice law with a family law firm. My husband and his brother have a partnership, Yamin and Yamin, so I'm with the firm. And they mostly do the real estate, but I also do family law and wills and estates and some disability work.
Okay, very good.
In my family, I have twin girls. And my husband, I'm married to Bob Yamin, who's a city attorney, and he practices law with Yamin and Yamin. And he loves to hand out Yamin and Yamin pens, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I've gotten a few of those.
A few of those, okay, good. And I love to be involved in the community. It's a wonderful community. And so I've been volunteering all my life here. I'm the immediate past chairman of the Chamber of Commerce Board. I was the first woman that was elected to that position in its 94-year history, so I did 3 years there.
God bless you.
Love that. I love the chamber. And
you did a good job.
We developed a wonderful women's business council, which I'm very active in. And I'm also incorporated with Savings Bank of Danbury. I'm on the board of directors of the Community Relations Board of FCI, and I'm also I co-chair one of the Jericho ministries, which is Christian Community Outreach Ministries, which is a wonderful ministry that helps the homeless and disadvantaged. So I've stayed involved in the community, which I love.
That's great that
Absolutely.
You do. That's the bad rap sometimes you hear, and polite or sometimes not so polite company. Well, attorneys, they just do their stuff and they don't really do anything else or whatever. But you and your husband have always been involved in a different manner of ways.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. I perform weddings. I don't know if I mentioned that. It's one of my favorite things
oh, okay.
to do.
That's part of being a judge,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Very good. So the probate court system, some people that may not have ever heard about that, how does that work? We can get into, does it work in this way or that way, but I'll let you basically discuss how does it work, what's the purpose, is it just when somebody dies, so go ahead and tell us a little bit about it.
The probate court is a state court system in Connecticut. It's over 300 years old. And it's the state court just like Superior Court is. The difference is the probate court judges are elected. We run for office every 4 years. And they're mostly located in the city halls of their towns and very local, although they've been consolidated into regions most recently. And the jurisdiction of the court, mostly wills, trusts, and estates. So when people pass away, to ensure that their wills are properly handled and also trusts and things of that nature. But in addition to that, there's a lot of other matters we handle that people aren't really aware of, and that includes conservatorships, where we appoint someone to take care of someone's affairs if they're not capable. And we do a great deal of children's matters, temporary guardianships if a parent can't take care of their child, and there's a lot of relatives serving as guardians, so we do a lot of guardianships. And in some sad cases, we also do termination of parental rights, and I do adoptions, which is a happy thing I do. Also, if someone's has mental disabilities, we do guardians of the intellectually disabled, and we appoint those. And a potpourri of other things, including name changes. People come to court for their name change through the probate court. So we have a significant number of those. And we also do emancipations, paternity.
What's an emancipation?
If a minor wishes to be emancipated from their parents, and to prove that they're self-sufficient, supporting themselves, and so we don't see too many of those. But it's a kind of an expensive area to be self-supporting.
It could be a child star or something that's made a bundle, and now they're afraid their parents is taking their money at the ripe old age of 16 or something. You know,
they probably do a lot of those in California, but maybe not too many here.
Not too many here. Okay. You mentioned there was a consolidation of the court system. How many, at one time, what was there, 139 courts or something, almost one for every little town or whatever?
Yeah, actually, when I was first elected back in 1990, we had 133 courts.
Okay. And
so there was almost one for each town, and we had more courts at that time than California or Texas. And then over the years, they've slowly have consolidated. As of a couple of years ago, it was 117 courts. And when the consolidation took effect just about 2 years ago, it was mandated that we go to 50 courts. So all the judges met together over a period of a couple days and had a big map on the wall, and we came up with a wonderful consolidated system, which all the judges agreed to, and it came down to 54 courts. So in our area, Danbury didn't change. Danbury is a big city, and it's a very busy court, about 800 cases a year. So we just maintain jurisdiction of Danbury, but some of the other towns.
Is it like a place like New Milford maybe has some area courts that have been
yeah. New Milford, in addition to Bridgewater, gained Sherman, New Fairfield, and Brookfield. So New Milford is now the Housatonic Court, and then the other court in our area that also consolidated was the towns of Bethel, Ridgefield, Reading, and Newtown, and all those are together, and they're all in Bethel.
In Bethel.
And they're called the Northern Fairfield County Probate Court. So they have 4 towns there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So 54 from 117. And let's get into more detail of what a can we get out? Conservator. Right.
Conservator is someone the court appoints to take care of someone's affairs. And I want to distinguish that from a power of attorney. Because
there's a little confusion on the power of attorney.
Yeah, the power of attorney is someone you can appoint to act as your agent. So you could still act. You can still do banking, and your power of attorney will also act on your behalf. And it's good as long as you're alive, although you can always revoke it. And there's a power of attorney for finances and banking and business, and there's a separate one, because the law changed a few years ago, you need a separate one for healthcare power of attorney.
That's true.
And but the conservator is different. It's under court supervision, where the power of attorney doesn't have that supervision. And so you have to do accountings to the court, and there's hearings, and there's a lot of due process to make sure the person's rights are viewed and taken care of, because we have a lot of hearings just so we can hear their opinion. So the conservatorship is under court supervision. Although many people don't realize it, but with power of attorneys, there is a statute that allows someone to request a accounting by someone who served as a power of attorney. So we'll sometimes see that sometimes if someone opens an estate for someone, and then while the person was alive, they had a power of attorney, and there was some concern about how the money was spent, then that executor of the estate can now ask that power of attorney to do an accounting. So that there is some definitely some checks and balances there.
Right. Now, what are some of the changes that have been made in this regard? You see that the legislature met, and there were some changes.
In the conservatorships?
Right.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it was really an increase in people's rights. Many years ago, when conservators were appointed, they had full authority to do pretty much everything. And they would, have people go into nursing homes and take care of them in that regard. But the new law changed a couple of years ago, and now before a conservator can put someone to a nursing home, they have to have a hearing on it, and the person would have a right to be heard before they can terminate their lease, before they can dispose of their personal property items. So hearings are required in all these different areas.
Because there's been so much abuse.
I think there may have been some overzealous conservators, although I think the majority of them have acted in good faith and have done well for people. The other thing was the court now restricts the grants of authority to the conservators. Instead of doing everything for the person, we only assign them to the duties that are necessary to help the person, and we have to have the person kept as independent as possible. So there was definitely some changes, but all for the good, I think.
Okay. Tell me about the Melissa Project. I guess that had something to do with the mental health.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Melissa Project, interesting project. It started years ago, and it's a intensive case management for mentally ill people that are not compliant with their medication. And it started actually, they started in the Danbury, Torrington, and Waterbury probate courts. So we were very lucky to be pilots of the program. And what happens is we get assigned so many slots. I think I initially had 18 slots. And I could choose the most difficult cases, conservatorships, usually maybe a schizophrenic that doesn't take medication, that's constantly in and out of the hospital, and assign it to the Melissa Project. It's a free program to the family that has the person who is under conservatorship. And they do intensive case management. They actually have a social worker that has daily contact with the person, and they are a liaison between the doctors, the families, and all the different providers, so that there's no mistakes regarding medications or duplication. And as soon as the person starts to decompensate, they jump right on it and make sure that they're taking their medication. And the greatest thing about this program is that it's decreased people's hospitalizations by like 80%. It used to be a huge cost. Also, it's a cost saving to the system because they were like cycling in and out of the emergency room and into the psychiatric ward, and they'd be 5 visits in over a 3-month period. And the cases that have Melissa Project now, don't have that repeat hospitalizations. And with all the tragedy, the terrible tragedy in Newtown, they've expanded this program. I used to have like 14 or so slots. Now I have like another 10 slots available to me. So I'm able to take the most, difficult cases and get more case management for the mentally ill.
Now, what are some documents? This is like a common question you'll have. What documents do you need for your for estate planning purposes?
Basically, we already talked about some of them, and that's the power of attorney for health care and for your durable power of attorney for everything else. And it's durable because it's still good even if you had a stroke. It's still durable. It's good as long as you're alive. And those are 2 important documents. In addition to that, those people that don't want life support if they're in a terminal condition, comatose, vegetative state, important for them to have a living will. And it states their wishes. They don't want to be kept alive through artificial means and respirators. In addition
that's something, some writing that's done and goes through your court. So you see this and this is filed and
And those who have conservators have to see whether the person has a living will and follow their wishes. And I encourage people to have living wills if that's their wish, and to share that with their family members so they know what their wishes are. And the last one would be, in addition to a will, of course, a will is the most important staple document to have in all estates. If you own any property at all, it's important to have a will to determine who will handle the estate and who gets that property. And then lastly, the destination of conservator, which says if you ever need a conservator, who you want it to be. Although, there's a trend away from conservatorships, because if a person has a power of attorney that's working well, then the court shall not appoint a conservator. So I think we're seeing an increase of people really planning ahead for their possible disability. And that way...
they're giving it to a younger brother or somebody.
Or one of their children.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this one takes care of the health aspect, and this one takes care of if you should die or whatever.
Right, and they can even name more than one. They can name... they can name 2 of their children to be power of attorneys.
Yeah, that's true.
Joint if they want both to sign, or several of the either or to sign. So there's a lot of different options.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, if my family or if my spouse or family dies, when do I need to go through probate? Is there some kind of cutoff on the numbers?
Well, the probate. Basically, people often ask that if they have a family member pass away, when do they go through probate and when do they not need to? And essentially, if the person who died owned any property in their own name, a bank account, a car, they're going to definitely need probate to transfer that asset.
What if it was a bank book with $5,000 in there and it was in joint names?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The survivorship properties, if there's survivorship property, if everything's survivorship, such as a house and all the bank accounts, that's limited probate. They would go through probate in order to...
There's just a form.
Yeah, it's some forms, not even a hearing, because you need to file some forms to show that there's no estate tax due, and so something can be filed in the land records, and that will take the dead person's name off that survivorship property. So even joint real estate has to go through probate, but it's not a difficult process. And like I said, not even a hearing. So I think, you know, it's...
So it might be just a simple form or...
Exactly. You file some forms and there'll be a probate
But everything,
bill.
to be done right, you do have to go through probate.
Yeah, and it's best to ask. If people aren't sure, they should come to the probate court and just explain, you know, what the person owned, how it was titled, and the clerks can tell them whether they need to go through probate and which forms they need to use.
Because down the road, if they, 2 years later, they wanted to sell it and it wasn't done right, that would just hold up the sale to get it done right. You know, so may as well get it done right.
Get it done. And also, they started, interest now accrues on late probate fees. So it's important to get estates filed in a timely manner so that those probate fees don't incur any interest over time.
Is there any set schedule on fees so people have an idea what the fees are? Like, is it a 0.5% or 1% or?
Yeah, actually, there is a set schedule, and if you go to the probate website, which I'll refer you to in a moment, it'll set it out. But the probate fees range from $50 up to $12,500, and the $12,000 is only if you have like $5 million.
Oh, okay.
So
I was going to say.
a typical estate, I'd say $100,000, and it's going to your spouse. Then the probate fee is $290. And if it's not going to your spouse, it's going to one of your children. Then that's $465. So
a little more.
So a little bit more. So and then if it's a $200,000 estate, for instance, it's all going to your spouse. It's like a $465 probate fee, and it's more if it's not a spouse. The spouse gets kind of a reduction, 50% reduction in fees.
Which they should.
They should, absolutely.
They work hard all their life, you know. Okay, explain the procedures for what are they? I can't read it. What's the word for it? Estate? Decedent?
Decedent's estate?
Decedent estate, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta get changed my glasses.
Oh, that's okay.
Decedent estate.
Estates.
Yeah.
Decedent's estates, two different types of estates. The small estates are if the person owned property in their name alone of $40,000 or less. And so that's the small estate. And there's no hearing, just some paperwork gets filed to transfer that property. And if the solely owned property is over $40,000, or if there's any real estate that's solely owned, then it's a regular estate. And that takes a little bit longer because we do a notice saying that we're going to admit the will or appoint an administrator unless someone asks for a hearing. And then they have to file an inventory within 60 days. Then there's a 150 days claims period. And then they can do a final account at the end. So a regular estate takes a little bit longer, but there's still access to accounts. They still have an estate account. They can pay bills with it. They can apply for family allowance if they need money. So the estate does move along during that time period.
What if somebody dies without a will? That's like a no-no thing to do, but it probably
it's
runs.
Fairly common.
Yeah.
I think probably about 40% of estates don't have wills. And so Connecticut has a very good provisions in its statutes which set forth the distribution if there is no will. And that includes if you have a spouse and you have children of that marriage, then it'll explain that the first $100,000 of solely owned property goes to the spouse. The balance is divided between your spouse and your children. And if there's
and if there aren't any children, it might go to cousins.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of goes along the line. You know, first it's spouse,
so there
then
might
children,
there
then
might be cousins you don't like that are going to be getting money. So
third cousin twice removed.
always,
you know, we do have those cases.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have a will because then those cousins you don't like, they may be getting money that you don't really want to go that way.
Exactly, and I think it also gives
what's
you
a typical
chance to
will?
do charity.
I'm sorry, but what's a typical will cost?
I think the law firms probably vary on this, but I think you could probably get a will.
If you took an
for
average,
probably a couple. You can get one from a couple $100s up to under $1,000 for like a more major will with a lot of tax planning.
So there's no excuse, especially if you have some cousins you don't like. That
Absolutely.
if there aren't any kids, get a will so you don't you're not rolling around in your grave.
And also you want to appoint your executor who's going to be handling your estate, because what I see sometimes is if someone doesn't have a will, the bigger problem is they're all fighting over who's going to be handle the estate. And you pass away, you might have 4 children, and they all want to do it. They all want to be the administrator, because if there's no will, it's called administrator. If it's a will, they have it called the executor. So I think it just resolves a lot of conflict if you can lay things out that way in advance.
Okay, what other costs involved? I think we already covered.
The cost with the estate?
Yeah, the cost with the probate.
We talked about the probate fees, but the other cost would be estate tax.
Yeah, the estate tax with the what goes to the state.
Well, there's
the federal, there isn't any, but there's
$5
still
million exemption. So if you have under $5 million.
But the state, aren't there some fees?
$2 million exemption.
Oh, $2 million. Okay.
So those estates under $2 million, again, no estate tax for Connecticut. So you have your estate tax is number 1. Number 2 is your probate fees, which typically are in the hundreds of dollars. Number 3 would be attorney's fees. If you use an attorney, it's not required, and they have to be reasonable fees. There's a Hayward versus Plant case that kind of tells you that criteria. And then the last fee is the fiduciary fee. So your executor that you name in your will, they're entitled to a fee for their services. So those are kind of the 4 areas of fees that are involved.
Okay. Now, we talked about recent legislation. We talked about some specifics. Are there any other pieces of legislation that were recently enacted that you want to cover at this point?
This year, a lot of the legislation, due to the terrible tragedy in Newtown, a lot of the legislation revolved around gun violence prevention and mental health. So I guess the areas that affected the probate court included many different areas. In decedents' estates, for instance, there's specific provisions if the person who died had a gun, about how that gun may be transferred, a lot of different regulations on that. In commitments, we commit people to psychiatric hospitals, a lot of prohibitions about them not having guns for certain long periods of time. And in conservatorships, we've always sent a notice to the state if we appoint a conservator so they can't get a gun. But now in addition to that, we have to order all conservators to actually check whether the person had any firearms and to obtain them and get them turned in. So there's more procedures along those lines. And lastly, in name changes, we used to always have a registry. Before we can change someone's name, we check if they're on the sexual offender list. If they are, we don't change their name. But now there's a new registry that's out. If someone's committed a crime with a deadly weapon, their name is on a registry. We have to check that list, and we cannot change their names. So that's another way that the legislation has affected us. The other big area, of course, is mental health. And there's been a task force that's been developed to kind of study the issue of mental health. There's been increased funding for programs like the Melissa Project. And a couple other areas of legislation this year. They did develop a task force this year on Alzheimer's disease, which I think is important. And a couple other things included new procedures for access to joint safety deposit boxes. If you have a safety deposit box with someone who has passed away, it specifies procedure for how that can be handled. And
do they freeze the box, or?
They have a procedure where they can take an inventory of what's in the box and determine what belonged to the decedent and what belongs to the joint owner of that box. So some protections for the person who's on the box, as well. And another interesting legislation that passed this year, it seems with some of the individuals going away to war and going away to other parts of the country in the military, we're saving their sperm when they go away, and so now there's some laws to provide for babies that are born, their inheritance rights that are born after their parents have died, married parents. So perhaps a soldier gets killed in a situation,
right.
Then it provides for inheritance rights for a child that's born to their spouse after that time. So
right, because of the saving. New technology,
exactly.
New rules.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we're saying there.
Yeah.
So, but the most of the legislation though was in the area of gun violence and mental health, though.
We're down to our last few minutes here. What are some of the most challenging type of cases? We got. They just tell me we got about 3 minutes.
Okay. Probate is very personal. People are dealing with situations where they have mental health issues in their families. People have passed away, a lot of grieving. The most difficult areas, I think, are sometimes the families cannot agree on the dispositions of their loved ones' remains. So I actually have contested hearings in my court about disposition of remains, with siblings all fighting about that. So that's very hard.
Yeah, in other words, do they cremate?
Yeah.
Where do the cremains go?
And who gets
do they go
them
on the
and who-
ground? Do they go in the middle of the lake? Do they get thrown out
This
of an
cemetery
airplane?
here, or
Yeah.
and the other area I think always is difficult is the termination of parental rights, because sometimes in these cases the parents abandon the child, and so but it's always a difficult call. When is it in their best interest to terminate that rights completely and sever those rights?
And sometimes the kids are more like the parents, and the parents are the kids. I would imagine.
Right.
Those are the times you have situations like that.
Yeah.
You run into those.
Exactly, and I think even name changes, believe it or not, can be difficult. You'll have unmarried parents, and they can't agree on the child's last name. So those are
they give it a different name. Give
Dad
the
wants his name, Mom wants her last name.
So they take a different name.
So,
Has that ever happened?
Usually, you try to do what's in the child's best interest.
Right.
And you do try to strengthen the child's relationship with their father. If the child lives with a mom, you don't want to cut Dad out. So I think you have to look at all the different factors. But
Okay.
it's challenging, but it's extremely rewarding. I love my job, and every day is different.
Well, you've done it for a while, so obviously you do love your job.
A lot of practice.
A lot of practice, and
Absolutely.
that's what it is the practice of law.
Yeah.
You have your website. You were going to.
Oh yes, it's easy to remember, John.
Okay.
It's www.ctprobate.gov.
Okay.
So it's www.ctprobate.gov.
And then is there a telephone number that
Sure.
for the court? Yeah.
The court is, and by the way, Danbury Probate Court's open Monday through Thursday, 5:30 to 7:30 in the morning to 5:30 in the evening, Monday through Thursday, and we're at 203-797-4521.
Okay.
And I had an amazing staff of clerks. I'm very blessed with amazing staff.
So even when you're not in the office, you got people that can help.
They're right on everything, and they're so helpful, and
I
they're
think on
courteous.
Thursdays when you usually have your hearings and things.
Tuesdays and Thursdays all day.
Okay.
And I'm at the hospital frequently for hearings as well, and nursing homes too.
Right. Well, they're telling me we're running out of time, so I want to thank you for coming
Absolutely.
on the show.
I enjoyed it as always, John. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in the Community Forum. Tune in next week, same time, same station. We'll have another interesting program. Good night for now, and we'll see you then. Okay.